This is Ralph Brandt from the fireside. Actually, I'm out on my deck. You're looking at the edge of my deck and out into my backyard. And I want to just do a little talking to you. If you are a conservative, supporter of Donald Trump, MAGA, I'm going to ask you to do something. When he does something, ask yourself, honestly, if Joe Biden were doing this, where would I feel about this? Would I feel differently about this? If you're a Democrat and you look at something Donald Trump is doing, ask yourself the same question. How would I feel if Donald Trump were doing that? Ask those questions, no matter which side you're on. Ask those questions honestly. Look at yourself and say, am I judging righteously? And what is righteous judgment? Righteous judgment is putting aside our fears, our hates, our biases, and looking at the situation. One of the second questions that I ask is this good for the world? And just as important, is it good for the United States? And is it good for Pennsylvania, where I live? And I start looking at the pros and cons. And I start looking at what's happening. I'm a techie. I'm a technician. My background is building radios, building crystal filters for radios, programming computers, designing computer rooms. That's the kind of stuff I've done. More recently, configuring wide area networks. That's the ones that cover a state or more. I understand technology. Artificial intelligence is kind of shaky with me. I'm not really sure of some things on it, but even so, I see pros and cons in it. I saw pros and cons in a lot of other things. But when I look at this, I start asking myself, is this policy good? Not necessarily good for me, but good overall. And I don't care what policy you look at, somebody's not going to like it. I don't care if they like it or not. The question is, does it benefit people or doesn't it? And I'll give you a couple of examples. Back some years ago, Roe v. Wade made abortion the law of the land. And in those 40-some years, we have killed about 40 million babies in womb. Now, if you can tell me with a straight face that that's good, I have a problem with your thinking. About 6 years ago, they were telling us that we're only seeing about 500,000 abortions a year. Like, that's good. But it was better than the million we were seeing from about 1974. 73 was Roe v. Wade, February of 73. That is an interesting date to me because my wife was 3 months pregnant with my son at that time. Under Roe v. Wade, my son could have been aborted. It took about a year and a half for that abortion mill to wind up, and any industry takes time. And let's face it, abortion was an industry and still is. But a couple years ago, they were telling us it wasn't a million, it was down to 500,000. Now, I have two feelings about that. One is the lower it goes, the better. The second is it's still 500,000. That's a million every 2 years, not a million every year. Well, I just saw the latest figures. And now I'm beginning to wonder about those because the latest figures are it's back up to a million. What is going on? 40% of the contacts that Planned Parenthood have are for abortions. Our tax money is going for abortions. I am paying to have babies killed. I have a problem with that. If you want to, that is your business. No. But I ought to be able to get a tax deduction by saying, I'm against abortion, I ain't paying for that. But that won't happen. But if you can tell me that Roe v. Wade was a good idea, now I'm going to be a hypocrite here for a second. I'm not totally against abortion. I'm against abortion on demand, abortion for no reason, no medical reason. And quite frankly, if it's rape or incest, I'll turn my head. And I might even pay for that one if somebody asks me. You see, I have compassion for women, but I don't think I should finance irresponsibility. You know what you get when you finance irresponsibility? Same thing that you get when you finance anything. More of it. Let's go to another subject, net zero. That's where we can't put any more carbon dioxide into the air. Carbon dioxide is evil. I'm going to ask you a question. You know what would happen to these green plants behind me if the amount of carbon dioxide in the air dropped a significant amount? They'd stop growing, just the same as you would if we cut the amount of oxygen from 22% to somewhere I think around 17%. You don't live very good. The amount of carbon dioxide in the air, most people, you ask them, how much is in the air? Oh, 70%, 60%, 20%. No, not even 1%. 0.3%. Yeah. And the plants somewhat thrive on it. They produce our food. Okay? What happens if that gets down to 0.2? Most of what I have here would not be growing. We would see global starvation. There is a fictional movie, I think it's British, about a disease that killed off all grass crops in the world and caused global starvation. Grass crops include alfalfa, oats, wheat, I don't know what else. But if we took those out of the food chain, we would have global starvation. If the level of CO2 were to drop, let's look at another reality. The amount of CO2 that we put into the air by burning fossil fuels is not a significant percentage compared to what the world puts in. By the world, I'm talking about nature. Volcanoes spew CO2, lots of it. And oh, by the way, massive forest fires that we are not controlling produce CO2. And those massive forest fires are being made massive not by global warming, but by not managing the forests. Declared areas no roads, and we have these large areas with no roads. When a fire starts in that no road area, we can't get in to fight it. You've got guys hiking in miles to try to fight a fire, or worse, jumping in from an airplane into a burning forest. And it's because we won't trim, prune, provide proper fire roads, etc., etc. California has been the leader in stopping forest management. Does it make any sense that California is the leader in wildfires? And by the way, those wildfires started more than a few years ago. They started getting worse. Of course, couple that with the fact that you cut your firefighting force, you don't get proper aerial tankers in there, and they're going to grow. That forest fire recently, those couple of forest fires put more CO2 in the air than all of the automobiles and planes flying in the United States in a couple weeks. This is our problem. Was that no road thing good for anybody? I'm not sure, but I can see it being a problem for a lot. And it was like many things, a last-minute sign-in order before the end of a presidency. Let's look at EVs. The insurance industry has not caught up with the technology. When an EV catches fire, it goes totally. It's gone. When an internal combustion engine car burns, it burns. Either way. But the average cost of an EV is higher. The other thing is, if they're in an open parking lot, sometimes they set fire to 2 or 3 vehicles around them before they can be put out. They've sunk several roll-on, roll-off ships with fires of EVs. Now, careful. I am very careful to be factual. Some of those roll-on, roll-off fires cannot be traced to an EV starting it, but they can be traced to the EVs making it run out of control. If a hold full of internal combustion engine cars catches fire, a car catches fire in the hold, they close the vents and they pump in either nitrogen or CO2. CO2 has value, which smothers the fire. It's out. EV catches fire in there. There is no putting it out. And it changed from car to car. The internal combustion engine cars are required to have no more than 1 gallon of gasoline in them. Okay, so if you have 500 cars in there, you got 500 gallons of gasoline. But you have a chance of putting that out. First thing is, in most cases, putting in the inert gas will put it out. With a EV, they make some of the oxygen that feeds the fire. Putting in an inert gas doesn't fix it. And it is almost unknown that an internal combustion engine car will reignite after it's been put out. I'm sure it's happened, but I know of no cases. Case after case, EVs catch fire after they've been put out. And I've seen several figures on this. The one I like is the one by a guy called Satch D. That's his actual name, SATCHD. You can look him up on the web. He is not an anti-EVer. He is a firefighter. and a person who studies firefighting who has spent time with EVs. He is worth watching 2 or 3 of his programs just to see the truth that he's presenting. It takes somewhere between 600 and 1,200 gallons of water to put out an internal combustion engine car fire. That's statistics that are good. Most engines carry over 700 gallons. Usually one engine can put it out. Sometimes they got to hook up to a hydrant, or if they're out somewhere, they may need the second engine with water. It's a manageable situation. An EV, on the average, takes 11 to 22,000 gallons. I've seen hay fires. I'm a fire policeman. We've had some hay fires where we tanked in 30,000 gallons. We had tankers on the road running. If it happens out somewhere where there's no hydrants, you're going to be doing that. If it happens where there's a hydrant, you're going to be pumping out that much water. By the way, that water is potable water. Comes out of a hydrant. That's the same water you get out of your faucet. That's a lot of expense for water. Somewhere along the line, some of these things are going to come up to the front. What if you have an EV and it catches fire in a parking garage, and it not only burns every car in that garage, or at least a significant number of them, and damages the garage to a few $1,000,000? Are you responsible for that? I would tell you, I wouldn't want to be responsible for that kind of situation. I would not be wanting to see a summons to appear in court to defend myself on that kind of a lawsuit. There's too many things that we know. I might need a really good, expensive lawyer. I might lose. It's another aspect of this. This whole net zero is a mess. Another part of net zero is sustainable energy, or something like that. Let me ask you a question. What is sustainable when you're building windmills, or whatever they're called, that have a lifespan of less than 15 years? What are you going to do with those massive structures after 15 years? What about the habitat that you're ruining by putting up solar farms? What about the farmland that's being destroyed by solar farms? Yeah, these are questions. There are issues with solar generation that are just now starting to be being understood. When Spain took a dive, and Spain and Portugal, the whole Iberian Peninsula, lost electricity for about a day. And every indication is that the fact that they were running 50-some% solar and wind contributed to it being a massive outage rather than containable. Might have caused a couple of minor area blackouts. The other thing is there's a management issues with power that nobody wants to shed a load. And nobody wants to shed a load. And believe me, I don't want to see them shed a load. What that means is that if the grid needs this much electricity, because all of a sudden you've got a peak, and this is all that's available, you need to shed the difference. Shedding means you pull open a circuit that makes a section of a city black. But you have a chance to get them back on in 2 to 3 hours. When you take a whole region down, it takes 12 to 24 hours to get it back. When you take it down for 12 hours or more, restaurants have food spoilage. People can die because of oxygen generators going offline. 2 to 3 hours, it's dicey. but most of that don't happen in 2 to 3 hours. It happens after 6 or 8. We need this to be robust. And we're going in at a rate that nobody understands what's happening. We've got this blinders, and we don't see this out here. One of the problems with renewable energy, which isn't, by the way, the solar panels only have about a 12 to 14 year life. I know they'll talk more than that, but by the time they hit 14 years, they've degraded maybe 15-20%. Okay? Is that still life? I don't know. But when you start looking at all of this, you start to say, hey, wait a minute. And one of the problems with the renewable energy is government subsidies. If I could get 20 or 40% government subsidies to build a gas plant or a nuclear reactor, I could undercut the price of the renewables. That's what the renewables are getting. They're getting enough money to build. They're getting sweetheart dealing on permitting, which saves a lot of money. Once you start investing, and actually investing money in a project, every day that you do not get a return costs you interest. That's simple. This is the economics that nobody seems to understand. So when you don't have to spend 40% of your money that you would have to build a solar farm, you can sell the electric a lot cheaper. You can undercut places like TMI, which is exactly what happened to TMI. If TMI had gotten the same sweetheart agreement that the renewals did, as a matter of fact, it wouldn't have had to been that much. But if it would have gotten the same sweetheart agreement, it would have been competing and not shut down. Since that shutdown, I've done a couple things. I bought myself 2 very large backup batteries. I have a generator. I have a cutover switch to be able to cut over certain circuits, not the whole house. That's a disaster. You don't want to do that. I can keep up refrigeration and heat, and a little bit of creature comforts like the internet. And I've got a couple of solar panels, actually 4 of them, that during good sunlight periods, I won't have to run the generator. I'll be able to keep the refrigerator and the furnace working. That's my ideal. I'm actually experimenting with a wind turbine. That one's not turned out real well. I think the neighbors would get upset if I put up a 50-foot tower. Of course, I have a 38-foot one right now with ham radio antennas on it, so I guess it's not a whole lot more. But I've built this to protect myself. I don't want to sit around in the dark and cold and having food spoil. Your refrigerator will keep, your stuff in your freezer will keep for close to 24 hours if you keep the door shut. Your refrigerator will keep a little longer than that. And the food that you move from the freezer to the refrigerator will keep a little longer. But in about 3 days, almost everything that was in that freezer and refrigerator is gone. Let me tell you something else that happened in Spain. Internet went down almost immediately. Cellular went down within, I say down, It was going down within 2 hours. How many of you can live without your cell phone for 2 hours? See, it didn't matter if your battery was charged. Towers were going down. I'll tell you a funny story that kind of illustrates this. A pole went down in Lancaster County, near where my friend lives, or lived. And it took out a neighborhood, a good-sized neighborhood. And of course, at the time, he had a generator. He starts the generator, switches over a couple circuits, nothing going on. Everything's great. It's dark. Lady comes home, pulls in her driveway 2 houses down from him. And she's sitting in the car with the car running for 5-10 minutes. And finally he walks down and he says to her, "Ma'am, there's no power." And she says, "But my garage door opener has a battery." Yes, your garage door opener has a battery. But that motor inside is powered by a power from the power company that ain't there. And he had an awful time explaining it to her. That's the case with your cell phone if the towers go down. I personally thought that the towers would stay up a lot longer than that, because I thought they were hardened out to about 48 hours of diesel fuel. Now I'm wondering, when I say diesel fuel, most of the time it's not liquid. The question is, how long can you survive without that cell phone? I can tell you there were people trying to get a hold of their psychologist or their shrink in 2 hours without the cell phone. What do I do about that? Well, I got a ham radio license. I've got a GMRS license, and if you're interested in those, talk to me. I can contact a lot of people. I'm working now. My son has a GMRS license and GMRS equipment, and that's doable. Those radios are only about $35 or $40 a piece. They don't carry very far, but if you need to talk within your neighborhood or a little further, and if you do something I do, is I've got an antenna up there that's up about 20 feet. I can talk 15, 20 miles with that. By the way, some of our emergency management areas have receivers that they can receive that stuff. If you don't know much about this, this would be a good place to start looking. But this is what we are being pushed into by policies that nobody is questioning. I should say nobody. Policies that the national media that is making excuses for what's being done are not doing. I'll throw one more at you and then I'll quit. We have had a disaster in airports and air transport in the last 6 months, 5 months. I think it started in February. Gee, Trump took office in January 21, and all of a sudden we're having air crashes. Yeah. The Boeings that crashed were built before Trump took office. At least one of those was a bad build job. Maybe Trump took office in 2020 and did this. Okay? Again, I'm not whitewashing Trump. I'm just saying, let us be honest. Let us be honest. Okay? The air traffic control system in Newark is failing. Bad. real bad. Their only job is to communicate with planes. Okay, now, yeah, they have to figure out where they're to go, but their job is basically communicate. And suddenly, none of their radios work. I forget whether they're not hearing or they're not being heard, but it doesn't matter. Maybe it was both. The guy talking on the radio in the tower, his radio is not sitting here. It's not even in the tower in most cases. It's a mile away or somewhere on a high tower. There's a phone line between him and there that carries his voice and carries the voice coming back. They're ancient technology. Those lines, for the most part, are what are called T1s or DS1s. They're the same thing, by the way. The only difference is a T1 is trademarked by AT&T, and unless you're AT&T, you can't sell a T1. You can sell a DS1, it's the same thing, but you can't call it a T1. They've been around since, I think, the 60s. They're old technology. Admittedly, they're using better equipment than then. I worked with about 150 T1s. I know how prone to failure they were. I made money helping see that they were repaired. I had a job. They're not on fiber. They're on 2 pairs of copper wires. And there's a repeater every 2 miles or something like that. And if one of those repeaters fails, it's done. And even if you got a backup, somebody's got to switch it over. That technology did not age in the last 6 months. It aged over the last 30, 35 years. We have not done, actually more than that, we have not done the upgrades to that. Whose fault's that? Well, mainly it's Congress. There's 2 things that are wrong with the way it's done. One is, when you need to do an upgrade of something like that, you need a 3 to 5 to 7 year plan. You can't allocate money for part of it this year, part of it next year, part of it next year, and hope that next year the rest of it will be allocated to do the next step. The money has to be allocated for the project. This is one of the reasons why those projects with the government cost as much as they do, because you don't try to do the project, you try to do steps and hope that the next step gets done. When Trump took office, we had something like 8,000 ATC, air traffic controllers. We were short 3,000. These are round numbers. I think it was 8,700 and 3,300, but does a couple hundred matter? No. Trump takes office. You can't fix it in nothing flat. One of the problems was that good candidates were being rejected. Candidates with qualifications were being rejected because their skin color was wrong or their gender was wrong. Not their supposed gender, their real gender. As a result, they were filling the class, and 9 out of 10 were failing because they weren't pre-screening well enough. As a result, they weren't graduating enough to fill the losses. I don't know whether it's DEI or, in the cases of aircraft, DIE. This is what's been going on. This is another policy that needs to be fixed. There was a college certification program that when somebody come out of that, went into the air traffic control school, most of them graduated. I don't have a percentage, but most of them graduated. And most of them went in, became controllers. With the change of rejecting, and by the way, they were rejecting 90% of the qualified people. and filling that with people who knows what, going to go downhill. This is the policies that need to be changed, the ones that don't care about what it does to people. And if you're supporting one of those policies because the person who's supporting it has a D or an R, I don't care which, on their chest, you're part of the problem. This is Ralph Bryant from the Fireside.